to stand in before you, God's people. I prayed very diligently for a long time for God to give me somebody to tell my story to. And He has. And so I've bathed it in prayer. I've asked the Lord to speak through me to you, and so that it's not my words, that it's His. And so everything that's been studied and written today, I kind of made myself some notes. So as a teacher, I'm the one that gets off track and goes after rabbits. So somebody will come in and start talking about their football game, and I'm off with it. And so I had to kind of keep myself focused. So I made myself some notes. But I'm very graciously thankful for the opportunity to share the great change God's made in my life. So I'd like to start off with the words inspired by Kirk Franklin. The myth is that storms have to do with punishment, that they are God's response to sin or His disappointment in us as children. But may I suggest that it's the opposite. It is the confirmation that we are flowers that our Father has planted and He desires us to grow. And no matter how painful or inconvenient, it is necessary for the flower's beauty. Today, as I share a collection of the necessary storms and failures in my life during the season of completing an Ironman, please allow the Lord to use the testimony of the resulting growth to encourage you to not be afraid to grow during a season of showers or failures in your life, that there is a purpose for your pain and for your sorrow. From the moment that we're conceived, a war is waged against mankind. Man is made in God's image. For the longest time, I couldn't understand why does Satan hate us so much. But it's because we are made in God's image, and He despises us. And His purpose is to create scar tissue that will build up to the point of building a hard, callous soul that refuses God's love. He will use anxiety and fear. He will use pride and death, sorrow, defeat, greed, abuse, poverty, failure, and any and all kinds of sin, and the resulting guilt, shame, and condemnation that comes along with that, to prevent us from coming to Jesus and for the great amount of love that He wants to give us, the great amount of forgiveness, to give us His one precious gift. That song was for me. I could never understand why would God give His child for such a wretch as I. And none of this is done in secret, what the enemy does to us. God is completely aware. It's not done in private. The Lord's aware of the enemy's tactics. Satan had to get permission to torment Job and to take away everything he owned. He said, you have a hedge of protection around him. If you take that hedge down, then he'll fold. And he did this in the Old Testament. But you know, that same tactic was still going on in the New Testament with Peter. So for my anchor text today, I'd like you to look to Luke 22:31 through 32. It says, it is written, and it says, and the Lord said, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for thee, that thy faith fail not, and when thou art converted, strengthen thy brethren. So I've been asked to share my testimony about completing an Ironman, but to understand what happened and what took place requires me to share those storms that preceded it the years earlier. Because my sifting started at a very early age as a child. This scar tissue that He wanted to form, sometimes He starts to form it when we're very, very small. And so I had survived several forms of abuse and also a traumatic assault as a child. So I didn't know it at the time, but it was creating a desire in my heart for complete and total acceptance. Something that man is not possibly able to give. Only God can give complete and total acceptance. A true love that only God can provide you. Without realizing, I began on a journey to find it, and it created this deep fighting spirit inside of me, this fight just deep down in my soul. So I began to set unhealthy boundaries with people. I kept people at a distance. You can come this far to me, but in my heart, I'm going to hold you right here, because I'm going to hold this real near and dear to me, so I'm only going to let you come just so far. And so the few people that I would allow to come close, I made them idols in my life. I literally just worshiped them. I would accept them completely and totally. They had arrived at a spot in my heart that it didn't matter what they did, they were accepted. Meanwhile, the other billions of people on the planet, I'm going to keep you over here, but I've got these 4 or 5 that I'm going to keep to myself right close. And so the very people who say, I don't need you, I'm fine by myself, I can do it, those are the very people who need to know and understand God's love, because you do need somebody. You need Jesus. He is who you need. So my father was a bivocational pastor. He was a welder and he was a preacher. And so that was the first place that I heard of Jesus. And at the time, I didn't know the traumatic childhood that my father went through. He had an alcoholic father, and my mother had an alcoholic mother. And they were bound and determined they were not going to have the same childhood that they had. And so in their deep love for us, they tried to create a cocoon, and they wanted to protect us. And in doing that, it was a very legalistic environment to start with. And the mantra around our house was, I would always ask my dad, Dad, what are you preaching today? He said, sin and how God hates it. It didn't matter what day of the year it was. I could ask him in January, and I could ask him in December, Daddy, what are you preaching about today? Oh, sin and how God hates it. And he would say that over and over. And we were raised very legalistic. You know, we didn't wear pants to church. We didn't wear shorts. We didn't wear bathing suits. There were certain things we couldn't say or do. You know, it was a long list of do's and don'ts. The emotion behind it was love, but it turned out that my parents had no way of knowing that I was being taken advantage of. And so those deep legalistic rules and whippings that I got, they were a deep source of anger and rebellion for me. And so while they remained very legalistic until much later in my life when God did a work and they finally began to minister and focus on the gospel of God's grace, because as an adult, both my parents came to me and they shared deep remorse for some of those beatings that were over trivial, just small things. They were very deeply moved and realized that they were trying to create an impossible environment of protection and also unrealistic expectations. So it was understood in our home that you were loved, but it just wasn't something that was said out loud. Until I was well into adulthood, my daddy still, to the day he died, he hugged like this. If you wanted a hug from my dad, this is how Dad, I love you. And I would just want to grab a hold of him, but Dad always, like that. And so it was just something that was understood you were loved, but it wasn't said. So my brother's a decade younger than me almost, and so we have very different, extremely different childhood memories because our parents were very godly and they truly loved the Lord and us, and they wanted us to not grow up in a sinful, corrupt environment. And so, towards the end of when I got into a young adulthood, my mother and I became best friends. And I idolized her. I just worshipped her. I just loved her. Mom, what do you need? Mom, what can I do for you? You know, I wake up in the morning time. Yeah, I'm on my way to work. Everything was about Mom and family and friends. And so, the ones that I had let close to me, I wanted to make sure they were loved and taken care of. And so, God's grace and His love and acceptance should have been enough, but I was still desiring I didn't know at the time that's what I needed, so I looked to them for a love and acceptance that it wasn't humanly possible to give me what I was looking for. And so in elementary school, true story, I never became part of a team of any kind. I attended 5 different schools by the time I was in 5th grade. Now looking back at it as a teacher, I understand 5 schools, 5 years, 5 different school districts. That's a lot to ask on a kid. No real friends. You don't really fit in anywhere you go. You're always the new kid. And so, but my brothers here can testify that I am not gifted in sports of any kind. None. I tried out for cheerleader twice, and I didn't make it either time. I went to the basketball coach in middle school, and I wanted to run track so bad, but she said, okay, you can run track, but you got to play basketball. I'm like, no, you don't want that. Because I tried basketball in elementary school and tried to shoot a goal for the other team and just went down the wrong way. I don't know if Scott remembers that or not. You remember that? So I early on I had a desire to run, but I didn't even know it. But music was my thing. I took voice lessons and went to piano recitals. It just became part of who I was. But sports were a no-go. And so my brothers, they got such approval from family and friends about their accomplishments, and people would go to their games and root and watch, and there's just not people going to a recital as you're singing going, woo, sing it, you got this, you can do it, sing that song, sing it, choke back and sing it. They don't do that. And so I wanted that so badly, but I didn't realize it at the time, but that was a spirit of pride that was beginning to develop in my heart. And I didn't even know it. So I had this pent-up anger of wrongs done to me early on, and the enemy's voice in my ear screaming, nobody loves you, nobody cares about you, it doesn't matter anyway, you can't keep all the rules. So I just became a rebellious, smart-aleck teenager. And so that desire for acceptance, though, was still there. It was just missing, and I couldn't seem to grasp a hold of it. So my teenage years ended with me taking care of my mom. She had cancer. And so I would run the house for my dad, and when I wasn't at home, I rebelled, but when I was at home, I took care and raised my two brothers while my dad went to work. But I was the poster child for rebellious, just smart aleck. And, the enemy will lie lies to teenagers. He'll say, drink this and all your troubles will go away. Carpe diem, seize the day. He feeds our teenagers lies, and I had bought into those lies. And so I got caught in this cycle of sin as a teenager. I grew up in a religious house. And so I would live one way on Saturdays, but then on Sundays, oh Lord, please forgive me. I'm just so sorry. Please save me if I'm not saved. If I've done something wrong, please just save me. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. So I was trying to keep rules, trying to come to God by saying, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to do that. And that's just not the way how salvation works. And so at the age of 18, I got married. And then at 19, one Sunday morning at that church down there, God got a hold of my heart through Brent Benson, and I knew that I was a sinner. I was hell-bent, hell-bound, and I needed to come to Christ His way. And He got a hold of my heart, and He squeezed my heart. And so at that moment, I stood in the baptistry. I'll never forget it. It was the orange carpet church, and we stood in there, and I remember as I was getting ready to baptize, I said, Lord, I have faith in You. I know I'm a sinner. I know I can't do things right. I know You did everything right, and You can. And from this moment on, I'm Yours, God. Do with me what You can. And I got baptized. I did not know at that moment just how much He loved me. I still didn't know I was loved. I knew I was a sinner. I knew I needed to be saved. But at that moment, I just didn't know how much He loved me. And so after getting saved, I was determined I was going to be the best mom on the block. I was the PTO mom. If you needed it done, you could call me. I stayed at home for 12 years, went to school at night, and I was there. I was at the school. I was at the ball games. A few of you here can attest, many weekends at softball fields, day and night, and sunscreen and lawn chairs, and hit the ball, and that desire was still down inside of me. Man, I wish I could do that. I want to do something like that. That just seems so cool. I want to be able to do that. They always said choke up on the bat. I don't ever know what that really means. So to choke up on the bat. It says choke up on the bat. I want you keep your eye on the ball. Bubba tried to teach me to play ball one time. He said, keep your eye on the ball. True story. It went, and he said, stop. Just stop right there. Just stop. No, we're going to the emergency room. So I walked around with a black eye all week. People thought I was being abused at home when really I just couldn't catch the ball. So I was just determined by the world standards. I had everything. I had a house. I had a husband. I had cars. I had a job. I had an education. Things were rolling right on along. But then along came the opportunity to do an Ironman. And so at this point, I want you to think of a person, a place, or a thing, or some activity that if God asks you to give it up immediately, it would cause you to grip your hands tight on it so hard, and you should, no, not them. Not that, not that. You can take anything, don't take that. No, not my wife, not my child. No, not my husband. No, I gotta be able to play baseball. I gotta be able to swim, bike, and run. I've gotta be able to do that. Don't take that. So I want you to hold on to that thought and keep it into your heart. So as I had asked Christ into my heart, determined to live by the rules, and I was going to be a good mom, and I was going to love my kids, and deep inside I could feel God calling me to be a prayer warrior. And so I began to pray. I prayed night and day. I prayed for my family. I prayed for my friends. I prayed for my husband's family, and we got to see several of his family members get saved. God allowed us to see that. It was just such a blessing for me. And so I loved Jesus, and I grew in the grace and knowledge of Him. But 22 years after I asked Him into my heart, God said, okay, it's time to grow. You know, some of us are on milk, and we go through life. I love Jesus. Let's go to church, and everything's okay, and then it's good. But in order to grow, there has to be a storm. And so God said, okay, this is going to hurt a little bit. And it did. It hurt a whole lot. So part of my mantra was not who I was, 1990 pound. If you want to know my password for about a decade, not who I was, 1990 pound. I was just so proud that I didn't do all those things I used to do, and I was trying to live for God and be a good Christian wife. And so God said, that's pride. That's not grace. That's not what I did. I did all the work. I worked through you, but He had to do a work in my life to prove that to me. And so the first thing I did, my husband and I ran a marathon for my mom. I didn't know how long 26.2 miles was, but I heard her talk about it so long. I said, Mama, I'm going to do that for you. How far is that? She said, 26.2 miles. I was like, oh, okay. So then I went home and told my husband, hey, we're going to run 26.2 miles. He said, are you crazy? I'm like, is that far? Because he played football. He knew exactly how far 26.2 miles was. I didn't. And so he's like, yeah, that's far. And I was like, well, we've signed up. And he's like, so he would always run ahead of me, and I was so competitive, and it would make me so angry because I'm like, you haven't done anything. How can you still be faster than me? And he would just kick out like he was, running, and I was like, oh, I would want to go so much faster. And so I just kept, all of a sudden, Satan started feeding this competitive spirit in my heart. All of a sudden, this need to prove myself, to be better, started to grow just from doing a marathon. And that marathon is a whole nother story for a whole nother day. It would take another 20 minutes to prove it, but we did run 26.2 miles. It was our very first running race ever that we did. And so that's a long story. So a little while after that, I can remember it was about the time my kids were leaving home, and my husband said, well, hey, look at this right here. And he was talking about the Ironman race. And he said, they don't just run, they bike and swim too. I'm like, what? And I'll never forget it. We were in our bedroom, and he was looking on the computer, and I was like, they what? He's like, yeah, they swim first, then they bike, and then they run. I'm like, hey, I went swimming in a creek. I can do that. And I'm like, we rode bicycles as a kid. We can do that. Hey, we can do that. And he was like, are you crazy? And I'm like, no, I'm not. We can do this. And so we signed up for triathlon. Our very first one was Race of Grace was the name of it. And I knew, looking back, God knew what race I had to sign up for first. The name of that race, true story, was called the Race of Grace. I started feeding a competitive athletic spirit with that race, and God knew it would take an act of grace to deliver me from it. And so we began to train, and I began to bike and pray, and I would pray for this and that, and it was just time of fellowship with the Lord. And then my mother-in-law who was like a second mom to me, she got sick with cancer, and I would pray night and day. And she passed away, and my husband and I were there when she passed away, and I just became numb. I couldn't believe, I didn't understand, why did she die? And it was like losing my own mother. And I saw his sorrow and grief, and I had sorrow and grief, and I just shut down. I just stopped. That was my way of coping. I just stopped. And so, not knowing that you should never stop talking to God, no matter if you feel like you can or not. You have to at least say, God, I don't have the words. Your word says that the Holy Spirit will groan for us with intercedings when we can't express it, but I should at least go into your presence and bow down and put myself there and go, I have no words for this. Please help me. But instead, I just stopped praying, stopped singing, stopped all of it. And so, in the meantime, I found Ironman training to be an outlet. I was finally an athlete. My body was starting to change. I was getting stronger. We were having more and more races. I became consumed with how long did it take this person to do that, and how long did it take them to do that. And so, like Jonah, I literally ran away from God. I literally ran away from God. And so, the day that my husband came, in 2015, I was in a meeting at school, professional development. We were at Life Church. My husband is a very meticulously neat man, and he doesn't go anywhere without being all nice and clean cut. So I knew when he walked in a room full of about 100 people in professional attire, and he still had his old work clothes on from the shop, I knew something before he ever got to me. I knew something was bad wrong. And he came straight away to get me, and my mom had had a heart attack and had died. And so at that moment, I was already numb for my mother-in-law, but then my mom, my best friend, who we had just made reconciliation into my young adulthood, she was gone. I didn't have the time with her that I wanted. I wanted time. We wanted to travel together. We were laughing, and all those years of rebellion had passed away, and we had a new reconciled, but I had made her an idol. So when she died, I was devastated. I couldn't go on anymore. My world just fell apart. That was one of the people that if I had gripped onto so tight, I didn't know she belonged to God. I thought she belonged to me. She was my mama. That was my mama. She was mine. That's not your daughter. That's my mom. And so I thought she belonged to me. And so I began developing, I call it the silent years. I didn't do anything. I didn't pray. I didn't read my Bible. I went to church, but my mind would be somewhere else. And so I tried to revert to old thought patterns and ways of doing things that I hadn't thought or done for years. Nobody cares or tries, so why should I? These patterns of thinking that I had long left in my teenage years, and nobody saw this rebellion but my husband and my kids and God, because it wasn't something loud and boisterous for everybody to see, but I was devastated because I knew that I never learned how to love God more than I loved my family. Family's a good thing. How can you love God more than you love your mama? That's hard to figure out. That's hard waters to navigate. How do we take a family member and idolize them to the point? I can remember scratching my head and thinking, how do we do this? And not knowing what idol worship was, I was also worshiping my Ironman training. What does that mean? It means that those rigorous workout schedules, day after day after day, I would get up 4 o'clock in the morning and I would run 6 to 8 miles before school. I'd go work all day, get out of school. I'd go swim for a couple hours. I'd go bike for a couple hours. And so I had a coach at that time, and so I questioned him, what should I do about this or that? And you can better believe that did not make God very happy, that I was not consulting him about where I was going and what I was doing. I didn't inquire of him. In my heart, I was bowing down to the memory of my mom, and I was bowing down to Iron Man, and I was bowing down to my family and the coach that I thought helped get me there. There was no time with God, no Bible, no prayer, no songs, and no grateful attitude. I didn't thank God for the abilities that He'd given me. I spent all those years wanting something, and when I finally got it, I didn't thank God for it. So in Romans 1:21 it says, "For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal man, birds, animals, and reptiles. They worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator who is praised forever." Images made to look like mortal man. Worshipped and served created things. Well, I don't worship. When you bow down and you put the things of your family first before God, when you put things of your job before God, that's idol worship. It's what it is. It doesn't look like Big Buddha. For some countries and for some cultures, that's what it looks like. But for our culture, it looks like a mirror. We've made ourselves our idol. I had begun to make myself an idol, and I didn't even realize that's what I had done. So when race day came, I was strong and physically fit on the outside, but on the inside, I was a mess. I was weak. And so when I go to tell you about this race, it's a story of only God's grace, of giving me things that I needed that day that I didn't know that He was the provider for. So when I went to go to the swim, it's a 2.4 mile swim. I had swam at that Laurel Natatorium so much that I was sick of that pool. And I swam. There were days I would cry in the water. True story, Warren taught me how to swim down there. And so he would say, swim 500, kick a 500, drill 500, all he does. So I was swimming like 2,000 meters one night. And I had been sick and I was tired. And so I had been coughing. I was swimming horribly. About halfway through, I'd been swimming about 45 minutes. Coach Warren said, "Jennifer!" I had earplugs in my ear. And I looked up at him and I was like, I could hear him thinking, I thought he was fixing to say, "Get out of the water, baby. You're looking real bad. You look sick." No, that's not what he said. He said, "You're not pulling your elbow up high enough. Get your elbow up higher." And I thought, now I know exactly how our kids feel when we go, "Shake it off, shake it off." Because he was essentially telling me to shake it off. And I was like, "Are you kidding me? I'm sick. I can't do that." And I was like, okay. And then all those times we told Bug and Mackie, "Shake it off, shake it off." So, but when we're faithless, He remains faithful. He cannot deny Himself. That's what He says in 2 Timothy. And so as I began that swim, my heart was just racing out of my chest. I knew there was time limits that I had to do what I had to do in the amount of time I said I had to do it in. So I made the swim cut off. I think it was about an hour I swam, and then got on the bicycle, and it's a 112-mile bike normally. But on that particular day, because the route went in front of a church, and it was a Sunday, the church said, "You've got to reroute and go a different way." So 4 extra miles were added on to our bike route because a church on the Sabbath didn't want us riding our bikes in front of it, when they could have stood out in the yard and held up signs for Jesus and said, "Bike for Jesus," or just some way of message. God just gave you 3,000 people to minister to, and you just told them to go 4 miles out of the way. We don't want you. So on the second loop, the 56-mile loop, the second loop of it, I really didn't know how I was going to make it. I had been nursing a foot injury. At the time, I didn't know it was plantar fasciitis, but my foot just began to feel like there were nails in it. And when I got to the changing tent, I got off the bike. I had biked about 6 hours. I got into the changing tent. I couldn't even reach down to take my shoes off. They have volunteers in there that help you get dressed and undressed because your body is just shot. And so she was helping me change my shoes and get dressed and giving me Tylenol. And I had a decision to make in that moment of, do I keep going or do I stop? Because my foot just felt like there was a spike in it, and my pride said, "I am not stopping. I'm going to keep going. I have worked for years. I'm going to finish this race." And so pride said, "You're going to finish it." And God said, "Okay, this is going to hurt, literally and figuratively." And so I got out on the run, and from the moment I took a first step, it felt like a stake in my foot. And so at that moment, I realized that I had signed up for something that I couldn't do. I can't do this. And all of a sudden, I hadn't talked to God in 3 years. And where did I go when I needed help? Where did I go when I can't do this. I want to do this for the memory of my mom. And I started praying. And God was faithful, even though I wasn't. He remained faithful that day. And I just began quoting that scripture, "Fear not, I'm with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee. I will help thee." And I quoted it for 6 hours as I ran. And so I finally came across the finish line, hobbled, got my medal. And you know what? I felt just like I did before I started. It didn't change a thing. I had this great big accomplishment and this great big shiny medal. And I had the same feelings I had before I started. It didn't change anything. I was still the same person. And I began to, right there at that moment, God started saying, "Okay, let me show you how bad this is going to hurt, what you've done." And so that year I'd signed up to run 1,000 miles. I had ran about 900. I was 100 miles short. And so I continued running that year. That happened in September. I finished out the year, got the 1,000 miles, but I did horrible damage to my feet, and I ended up having to have surgery for it. But it was in that moment, whenever God took away my ability to run and I had to have surgery on my foot, that God began to humble me and show me He was the one who gave me my abilities. He was the one that made me strong enough to complete that race. He was the one He kept all the rules and regulations. He did all the work, not me. And so we were made to worship God. We were never designed to worship our family, our friends, or our parents. And in Colossians it says, "For by Him were all things created that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones, dominions, principalities, or powers, or all things were created by Him and for Him." For Him. Not me, not you, not your mom, your dad, not your husband or your spouse. But it was made for Him. And so praise is an outward expression of the inward heart. True worship happens in the heart. Worship is excessive devotion, reverence, and service to a person or activity. It is what you set your affections on. And our God is a jealous God. And I did not know that one of the names of God is jealous. In Exodus 34:14 it says, "For thou shalt worship no other God, for the Lord, whose name is jealous," is a jealous God. And so I scratched my head as I was in that little boot for many, many months, and God said, "Okay, sit still, now what?" And so, I'm going to let you think about this for a little while. And so God began to show me He was jealous of that Ironman race. He was jealous of the excessive devotion I put on everybody besides Him. And I thought, well, in the New Testament, they say jealousy is wrong, but then in the Old Testament, God's a jealous God. How can God be jealous, but jealousy is wrong? I couldn't rectify the two. And then finally, God revealed to me that when you own something and it's yours, if your husband or your wife goes out, let's say you're out and about town, and somebody starts flirting with your husband or your wife, you have the right to be jealous. That's your wife. That's your love. You don't want anybody else to mess with that person. Jealousy, whenever you go, "I wish I could run a 7-minute mile. I wish somebody was hooting and hollering for me," that jealousy is wrong. But a godly jealousy, God's jealous over us because He loves us. We belong to Him. We were bought and paid for with a price. We're no longer our own. And so we belong to Him, and He knows if we set our sights and affections on other things, they will fail us every time. And He's the Lord that doesn't change. It says in Malachi, "I, the Lord your God, do not change." If God's jealous in the Old Testament, God's jealous in the New Testament, God's jealous in 2021. And that's what happens in our culture. We've set our sights on Facebook, on cell phones. Well, I don't bow down to anything. See how long you can put the phone down, and you'll know just how long you can go without it. See how long you can put your phone down, and it'll cut straight to your heart. Do you bow down to your phone? Do you check your messages first thing in the morning? That's what I was doing. Oh, I wonder what the coach has to say. What do I have to do today? Do I need to swim back run? What do I need to do? Oh, Facebook. Oh, who said what? Oh, look. Oh, Pinterest. Oh, that's cool. All the way down. Oh, text message from this. And so between text and emails and Facebook and Pinterest, we bow down to an idol. It's called a phone. And on the back of it, there's an apple that has a bite out of it. Remember Genesis? Eve was deceived. That's Satan's little dig at God, going, see there, I got you right here. Your people, they're looking at my phone, not your word. And so I left it all, even though, because no more Facebook, no more Pinterest, God, no more. My eyes are on you, God. You're my God. And I realized that all those sins that I had, God paid for that at the cross. All the times I chose email and Facebook and Pinterest over God, that was hung on the cross. My bicycle hung on the cross. My flippers and swimsuit hung on the cross. Every time I put somebody before God, He nailed it to the cross. And it was taken care of forever. And I had to know, no matter how much I could keep the law or not, it's by grace you're saved through faith, and that not of yourself. It's the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. But that doesn't mean that God doesn't want us to love Him. In Matthew 22:34, He's given us 2 new commandments. That law, I've read them. I've looked. I've studied Leviticus with Miss Julie. And trust me, when you look and see the law was given to show us, we can't keep it. We can't be good enough. We cannot keep the law. And so God says, okay, love me with all your heart. Matthew 22:34. And this is, God never changes, and God is jealous. And so He says His number one thing in Matthew is love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind and strength. And the second is love your neighbor as yourself. And so in that moment, I knew that God was saying, whatever you do, do heartily as unto the Lord and not unto men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance, for you serve the Lord. All those times I scratched my head going, how do I serve you and love you more than my family? But then family's a good thing. I need to love them and serve them. God said, if you love them like you're loving me, nothing's going to change. Your heart's going to change. I still love my family. I still would go out and lay down in the road for them. But my motive's different, because the motive is now, I love God with all my heart, and I want to treat you just like I would treat Jesus Himself. If Jesus wants me to go and get Him this or that, or needs me to stay up late doing this or that, or whatever it is your family, friends, or work needs, you go the extra mile, because that's what you would do for the Lord. And so I learned that God accepted me because of Jesus, and that He was the bridge between me and the Father. And we have to learn we can't do anything for God. God works through us. We're the vessels. But failure is the road through which grace delivers this lesson. You're not going to just deliver the lesson. So then the issue's not our failure, but God's grace in the blood of Jesus. And so the enemy will not just sit by. Remember, we started all this with sifting. So I've got a new place with the Lord. Lord, I love you with all my heart. Lord, I'm going to love my family. But I had part of my story I didn't want to share. And a dear sweet friend of mine, Kelsey, she came to me one day at school, and she had written out her testimony word for word. The bravery and the guts it took to tell her story. I couldn't believe what I was reading. It was so brave to tell people what she was telling people. And so I can't leave parts of my story out. I have to tell my whole story. And so most people don't know that I have a pineal cyst on my brain. It's benign. And what this does is that gland in the brain produces melatonin. It's what makes you sleep. And so my body produces none. There's a little bit produced in other parts of the body, but it's just like saying your body doesn't secrete insulin. My body doesn't secrete melatonin. I have complex migraines, and I have sleep apnea. And so this eventually led to one great big battle with sleep deprivation and a sleep deficit, which is now under control. But to some people who know the whole story, it may have seemed like that nothing good could come from such a battle that I had at that moment in life with sleep deprivation and sleep deficit, because it just put me in a very bad state physically. But God healed me from so much more than sleep deprivation and sleep deficit. Just as my body needed a deep, literal rest for recovery, my soul needed this rest from striving from the approval of men. I realized that I could not control what people think of me or who they think I am. I cannot control the parts of my story they don't know or that they don't understand. God and God alone defines my worth, not a race, not being well liked or well received, not accomplishments, not my efforts to right all the wrongs in the world, because I love kids, and if you mess with a kid, we're going to have problems and issues because I love them with all my heart. But even that desire to take up and right all the wrongs in the world, not my ability to walk a chalk line, Jesus and Jesus alone is enough. He redeemed me. He bought me. I'm His and His alone. So only God can be the true source of my provisions in life. Only He can provide the comfort I need. Only God sets men up and He deposes them. Only grace can cover a multitude of sin. So it's in this stage of my life that pride and the striving to be perfect has been released from me. I've been let go of it. I no longer have to be somebody, or I don't have to have accomplished something to be of value. I'm accepted by God's grace, and for any and all situations that I'm brought to, because those that He wants to humble, He will humble you. God will humble those He wants to humble. And it says, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. We're living sacrifices. What does that mean? That means when I get up and I wash the dishes like I'm washing the dishes for the Lord. When I get to school, I'm going to teach those kids like I'm doing it for the Lord. Because I'm like, Lord God, I can't stay on my knees that long. How can I go all day long? Because we have in our mind, this is what church looks like. It looks like the Pharisees and Sadducees, and it looks like a building, and we wear our Sunday best, and we come in here, and that's what church, and that's what serving God looks like. Serving God looks like being at Walmart, and you got to get home because you got to get to a ball game, but this lady in front of you really needs to go in front of you. Her child's crying and sick, and you're like, I really need to go. I don't have time for this, but you do all things as unto the Lord. And you say, ma'am, won't you? That's true worship. That's true worship. It's not coming in a building, and we do come together as an assembly. It says, for sake not your assembling of yourselves together. We do that. But guys, it's a relationship. It's a way of life. Your body, I'm the body for the Holy Spirit. My hands, my feet. God needs somebody to be His hands and feet. That's why our second commandment is to love our neighbor as ourselves. Because when you love God, you're going to love people. That's what we got to narrow it down to. We love God and we love people. We're the hands and the feet in the body of Christ. And so when we're the feet, we love others and we take the good news. What does that look like? That looks like somebody walking into your classroom when you've had a really bad day and saying, Miss Kyzar, I love you, like my sweet coworker did. That's true worship. That's sharing God's gospel. She knows I had a bad day or whatever. And she goes, here, let me, what can I do? What can I do to ease your burden? God said, what can I do? I can become human. I can take your sin. That's what I can do for you. I can give you, for God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in Him should not perish but have everlasting life. For God sent not His Son into the world to judge the world, but that the world through Him might be saved. We're so busy judging ourselves and judging other people. God didn't even send His own Son in the world to judge it. It says, "For God sent not his Son into the world to judge the world, but that the world through him might be saved." He was judged. He took it all. And so all of life is spiritual. In 2020, my dad and I both contracted COVID-19. And at the same time, while it knocked me off my feet, and I was a strong whippersnapper for an old lady, and I knew if it was knocking me around the way it was knocking me around, my daddy, who was almost 70, it was knocking him around. And so as that disease progresses, you feel like you can't breathe, you're suffocating. I couldn't even hear somebody. I ran and completed 140.6 miles, but I couldn't walk to the mailbox without getting out of breath. And I thought, life is never going to be the same. At one point, Bubba took me to the ER. I thought I was having a heart attack and dying because this chest, and the lady said, "No, that's just the COVID. You can't breathe." And she said, "It's probably going to move on this side too." I said, "But it feels like a heart attack." She said, "Yep, that's what it is." And so I knew if I felt that way, my dad, who had diabetes and was out of shape, I knew it was going to knock him for a loop. Well, he ended up that he couldn't breathe, and they put him on the floor and gave him oxygen. And we couldn't go because it was COVID. It's the craziest thing. And so, you know, God can use all things work together for the good of those who love the Lord. And so what Satan means for evil, that phone, he took it, and there's FaceTime on that phone. And so I was able to FaceTime my daddy while he was in the hospital. And the rebellious teenager who wouldn't do a thing he said early on in life, didn't want to wash the dishes, didn't want to do the clothes, didn't want to take care of my brothers, don't tell me what to do. Nobody's going to tell me what to do. That same girl wanted to do everything for her dad. I wanted to clean his house. I wanted to help him, especially after my mom died. And so here I was wanting to help, and I was helpless. I couldn't do anything. And so day after day, he would get more and more out of breath, and then they put him in ICU, and they put all these little masks. I mean, he would FaceTime me, and I could tell he was scared to death. He was suffocating to death, and a slow, suffocating death. And so we were able to FaceTime, and to know my dad and my brothers, it's like a walking comedy show. I do not know where they come up with all these jokes at. It is one great big barrel of laughs at Thanksgiving. They just cut jokes left and right. And the joke has always been that Ben is the favorite because he's the baby. And at Christmas time, they always put more bows and things on his present than mine. He gets everything. And so my dad was in the hospital, and finally my brother came home, and we were all in Dad's house, and we were trying to take care of business, take care of his bills, and this, that, and the other. And so we're FaceTiming. And remember back in the story now, God's grace of when my dad and Mom, we just didn't say I love you a whole lot, and Dad just a kind of sidearm hug, and me wanting so much his approval and whatnot. And so while we were all sitting around there on the phone, Dad said, "Hey sister, I love you." And he wasn't laughing, and he wasn't joking, and he didn't just say it. He looked right at me. He said, "Sister, I love you." Well, the boys, they just started cutting up, snickering and laughing. "Oh, now you're going to tell her you love her," because they were just laughing and kind of playing it off. But for me and Dad, in that moment, Dad and I knew God's grace that over FaceTime with his final breath for him to say, "I love you, sister." But it was one of the most beautiful things, and Dad's flower began to blossom. That was God's grace on display in our beauty. And so he passed away a couple of days later. And so at his funeral, we were all sitting down front, and we sang songs and we worshiped. And people around us probably didn't understand it, but as I looked around, all I saw was a garden of human sunflowers and flowers, all different kinds blooming at the same time. Because at the beginning I said, we are the flowers, and God desires to grow us. And we had all grown, and we all were blooming at different stages. And so that's whatever I would like to challenge you as you begin to bloom, and don't be afraid to grow. I started back swimming, biking, and running, and those times are now times of fellowship and prayer and worship. And you might see me at the natatorium, or you may see me out there running or biking, but when I get through and I kneel down and I put my hand to the sky and I hold my heart, I remember and I acknowledge God's sovereign power and the abilities that He's given me to do that. And then I remember the verse in Psalm 147:10. He says, He does not delight in the strength of the horse. He takes no pleasure in the legs of a man. The Lord takes pleasure in those who fear Him and those who hope in His mercy. So the joy of the Lord is my true strength. But by the grace of God, I am what I am, and that needs to be my new password for everything. But for the grace of God, now I am who I am, only because of God's grace.
What did God tell Paul? My grace is sufficient. Whatever you're in today, He's got enough grace to give to you. And as you go out today, I agree with what Jennifer said. The church is out there. I tell our people all the time, standing up here and preaching is the easiest thing I do. Walking out of this pulpit and living, it's the hardest thing I do. And it is for you too. But worship is a lifestyle. It's what we do every day. I want us to have a time of invitation. These altars will be open. If you want to come and pray, I'll be down front. But let me lead us in a word of prayer and then we'll stand this morning. Father, thank you for the gift of today. Lord, thank you for the precious testimony that we have heard. Thank you for the work that you have done in and through Jennifer, and you continue to do through her and through her family. Thank you for the work you do through all of us. And Father, thank you for never giving up. I know we do, and Lord, we go through days and weeks and we don't talk to you, and then when a problem comes up, Lord, you're the first one we run to. But God, thank you that you're available all day, every day, and that you never once turn your back on us. God, thank you for that. And that may be for somebody this morning that's just run from you this week, and you just want them to come back to you. You want them to come back to the peace and joy of life found in Jesus. And give them strength to do that. Take this time of invitation this morning, Father, and use it to bring glory and honor to you in Christ's name.